welcome everyone. Fabulous to have you all flooding in. I can see you there. Thanks for hanging in with us. We had just a minute or two of technical issues there. But I think we're getting there now. We're getting there now. Who's going to send the room? Ange, welcome along. Great to have you here. Denise, good to see you too. Kevin up in Port Macquarie. Good to have you here as well. Miss Merv, good to have you here too. I love this bit. I get to see who I'm hanging out with and you don't get to see anybody. It's cruel, isn't it? All right, I'm just opening the necessary boxes that I need. Melissa, hi. I can tell that I got that right because I can see you in the chat box there. Fabulous. Look, thank you so much for coming along. Fabulous to have you here today for a really important webinar. And it's an important video tutorial, I should call it, because I've got a theory, I've got a metaphor, as people who know me will know that there's a metaphor that I run across in almost everything that I use to try and help people to understand key points that I'm trying to make. Perhaps that's an indicator that I don't explain myself clearly enough the first time around. But the metaphor I have around parents, and I ran this as a principle as well, is that parents are either at the back of the boat or at the front of the boat. So what I mean by that is that your school is a boat. And you're trying to steer it in a certain direction. You're trying to take it from point A to point B. You're trying to take it somewhere special. And your parents are full of hot air. And I bet that's a metaphor that some of you have used before, you cruel and terrible people. I'm just checking my messages here just to make sure that we're all eCamp tools are all on screen, by the way. Oh boy. Just checking. Sorry, people. I don't know quite how to hide those. So what I might do is just pull them out of the way a little bit and just hope that I can do the best I can. I'm not quite sure how to do that thing of removing all these little bits and pieces that you can see on the screen there. I may just have to persist anyway. I'm sure you'll hang in there with me. Good. Yeah, so I've got this theory about parents being full of hot air. And they're either at the back of the boat or at the front of the boat, and they're blowing. So they're either blowing from the back and into your sail, and they're helping you get somewhere. And when they are at the back of the boat with you, that's fantastic. Or they're at the front, and they're putting hot air back into the sail, pushing you in the opposite direction that you want to go in. I have a strong belief when I thought through this metaphor that our parents are not necessarily ever standing in the middle of the boat. I just don't think they do. I think they move, sure. I think sometimes they stand at the back and one day and then the next day they're at the front. But I think that they stay very much, I think that they're either at one end or the other, and they're helping us move in one direction or the other. And our job is to try and do what we can to encourage them to stand with us at the back of the boat. When we do, the boat goes faster. We just get to where we want to go when they're on our side. Bringing them onto our side is important. I think that sometimes we forget that that's part of our job, is to work with parents. And I think what we hope they'll do sometimes is stand in the middle of the boat, and they never do. They'll kind of get out of the way. And sometimes even, I guess, even registering for a webinar like this is that one of the things you might have thought is, well, can't I just focus my attention on my teachers and on my students? But the thing is, these parents are not in the middle of the boat. We've got to get them to the back. We've got to get their support, because the alternative to that is them standing at the front. And we want to do something about that. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpack for you probably three key concepts here. Number one is we're going to look at historically sort of what's happened here in terms of parents and our schools. And then secondly, we're going to talk about what we can do about that. And then thirdly, I'm just going to give you the two most practical tips that I can think of that will hopefully allow you to be able to get some traction out of the investment of time that you've made today. And I think that would hopefully be a worthwhile thing for you. I know that you can see my stuff there, so I'm just trying to keep that out of the way wherever I possibly can. All right, cool. Let's get started, eh? All right, so a little bit first up of of history. I'm a bit of a fan of, there's a great character in The Simpsons called Krusty the Clown. And I think he uses this expression, what the hell was that? Better than anybody in history. I think that Krusty the Clown is one of the great characters of modern times. But I think the expression, what the hell was that, is something that we sometimes say short-term and long-term. So I think that what we get is that we after a meeting with a parent that you thought might have been a really casual and congenial conversation, all of a sudden blows up. We kind of find ourselves going, what the hell was that? And then there's also a secondary, what the hell was that, reserved for the long term. We find ourselves going, what's going on here? Why is this happening to us? Why are we struggling with parents all the time? And why are we getting tension? And why are we getting conflict? And what happened to the days when a parent would, for instance, a child would get in trouble twice because they got in trouble at school? Remember that? You went home, if you got in trouble at school, you went home and you got in trouble again. Whereas now something happened where parents feel they need to come down to the school and butt heads with us for some reason. Why is that a prevailing story? Why is that something that more school leaders are learning more about and are experiencing more? And what I think it's about, and this is the theory that I've run by multiple people for a long time, I think one of the reasons that we struggle to get to the bottom of what that's all about, and we say glib things like, oh, we've just become really self-centered as a society, but specifically around schools, what's happened here. And here's my theory, that nobody is to blame, and we keep looking for somebody to blame. We keep looking for parents, either parents' fault, and they just won't, they're sort of helicopter parents, and they won't let their kids actually stand on their own 2 feet and feel and take responsibility. Or parents on the other side are going, it's these teachers, they're absolutely hopeless. Can you believe they did this? And they recruit people either online or in the car park. And we've got to get past this blame idea, because the truth is that neither of us caused this. There was no moment over the last, say, 20 or 30 years as this deterioration has happened. It's actually a bit longer than that. It's probably 30 or 40 years if we're really honest about it. There was no moment when parents gathered en masse and said, you know what would be really good if we just stopped trusting the school to do the right thing by our kids. They didn't do that. And there was also no moment when educators got together and, for instance, had it included in an enterprise bargaining agreement that what we want to do is do our job, and we just want to get parents out of the way. We don't want them involved. We don't want them. None of that happened. So what happened? How did the trust start to disappear from within the relationship? Because can I tell you, that's what was holding it together. It wasn't that the kid got in trouble twice in a day. It was that we trusted each other to do our jobs, and we were actually prepared to even put up with some dodgy stuff on either end. You think about parents back in the day were putting up with corporal punishment at school. Ridiculous thing that adults would be striking their children in our school. But we would put up with it. Why? Because we were on the same page. We were trusting each other to do our job, no matter the way we went about it. As we learned more about each other's job and perhaps started to learn to criticise each other, some of that trust started to leak away. So who did it? Who caused this? I have a bit of a belief that it's the media. I know there's a little irony there, because some of you do see me in the media from time to time. And yeah, I try to get out there when I can and try to counteract the negative messaging around schools in the media, because that negative messaging is car crash messaging. And what I mean by that is that we don't notice on a freeway all the cars that are doing the right thing and that everything's fine with, but we notice the one that's crashed or that's broken down, and we rubberneck, we slow down for a look at that. And people that run current affairs shows have worked this out. And so what they do is they highlight conflict. They've realised that conflict and disagreement is far more interesting to their viewers than people getting along. And it's why, for instance, I'm just picking up on Kevin being in the audience today, that it's very difficult to get a news service to run a story that says this is the brilliant work that St. Paul's have done to connect with their community, because everyone's doing it. But if something goes wrong, if there's conflict, and I sometimes use the example of, if you've got a student at your school that's up in arms because they're not allowed to wear a satanic lip ring to school, and a parent who thinks that's frightfully unfair because it is not in your uniform policy that kids are not allowed to wear satanic lip rings to school, then current affair are interested. So what the hell was that? Who the hell was that? If I was going to build a poster with the enemy the antitheses of school culture on it, it would probably have Tracy Grimshaw on it. As much as I'm sure she's covered some very heartfelt and important stories, I also know that her program will beam a story into your parents' lounge rooms this week that says, "Don't trust schools. Look at this nutter principal we found that banned handstands or that took tomato sauce out of the canteen." And none of those things have anything to do with what makes a great school. None of them. But we have learned through being conditioned by regular drip feeding that schools don't know what they're doing. Parents have learned not to trust us in schools. And some of us will be having a moment right now. We go, right, hadn't thought about it that way before. Be aware, you're a victim of this too. Because Tracy will beam a story into your lounge room as well this week that says, "Don't trust families. Look at these nuts that we found throwing rocks on the roof of their neighbours at 1:30 in the morning, and that neighbour sold us the video footage that he took for $1,500. Yeah. So mistrust and conflict brings eyeballs. And we've got to ask ourselves sometimes, what are we going to do about that? Who will save us? Are we going to be helpless? Are we going to be stuck on the train tracks hoping someone else will come along and save me from the awful media who are putting this message out there about how bad we are when we're not that bad? What are we going to do about that? Is Tracy going to change her ways for us? Could we plead to her? Could we plead to some of these large multinational media empires? So could you please stop being such evil empires and show some of the good things that schools are doing every day? We could plead for that, but it's not going to happen. How does it change? It changes one school at a time. And I really have a fervent wish that that would be your school. That your school will come out of this video tutorial today and say, we are going to build an approach to connecting with our communities around the two things that they want to hear us speak about. And they are not uniform policy. Tracy wants to speak about that. They are not whether you've taken tomato sauce out of the canteen. Tracy wants to speak about that. But one of the things that hasn't changed in schools over the last 40 years or so is why parents send their kids to school. And I find this out because I run this hypothesis with every partner school I work with. And I ask the parents in the community when we run our parent engagement sessions, there are a lot of things that you could expect of the school. But if you could only expect two, what would you want the school to stand for? And so I'm just seeing Kevin's comment there that would fit up space and useless print. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, the problem is not that it's not happening. It's just not. They're just not interested. Where was I? I was talking about, yeah, how does that change? Tracy's interested in the peripheral stuff that draws us into conflict. We want to get clear for our parents what it is that we stand for deeply and what it is that we have areas of expertise around. When I ask the parents, what do you want your school to be responsible for, but there can only be two things. You're only allowed to give me two answers. What are they? And they come back to things that parents, I think 40, 50 years ago were saying. They want schools to be houses of learning. So they want the school to be a place where great education happens. And I talk to parents about how that means two things. One is we've got to teach these kids, your kids, as much as we possibly can that will be useful to them to be successful post-school. And the second thing we've got to do is, because we don't really know what jobs they're going to do, we have to make them great learners because they're going to have to learn on the job. We have to teach your kids to view themselves as capable learners. And parents, I just haven't had one yet, dozens and dozens and dozens of these. I haven't had one yet where a parent goes, no, I don't want that. No, they do. And then the second thing that comes up, the second thing that they tend to say they want the school to stand for, they tend to say things like social skills. And I talk to them about, I've got like a banner above social skills. I think there's something a bit bigger, a bit more profound than social skills. And it's things like collaboration and conflict resolution and relationship building and relationships to sustenance. And I call it citizen building. I still think that Australian parents send their kids to school because they're hoping that the school will do a great job in turning them into capable learners and that they will work with parents to turn them into decent citizens. And I think that's it. And what we need to do as educators is start to speak to that as our expertise. We don't speak to families with regularity about the things that, for instance, we organise. So one of my partner schools once, and they'd be happy to tell the story. They've had some great success since we spoke about this. I went along on a day where I work in the classrooms with the teachers, and the day began with an assembly, and they said, "Would you come?" I said, "Of course." And so came along to the assembly. And at the start of the day, the assistant principal got up and gave about a 15-minute speech about all the things that were going to happen between that Monday morning and that Friday afternoon. And it was a list of things that they were organising across the week. There were excursions, there were incursions, there were events in the school. There was when the early childhood assembly was going to be on, when the other primary assembly is going to be on. By the way, don't forget on Friday that there's a sausage sizzle, and all of these little things were included in the day. And they said at the end, "Did you enjoy our assembly?" And luckily they're a really robust leadership team, and I knew they'd be up for the conversation. And I said, "Not really." And they said, "Well, why?" And I said that there were a wonderful amount of parents there. Awesome. That there were parents there in attendance. I said, and all we told them is that we organise stuff. Now they can organise stuff. The parents can organise stuff. So all of a sudden they're on the same level as us. Of course they're going to criticise us if they think we do. But we need to speak to our parents at assemblies around how we do great teaching and learning and what the impact of that is, and also what citizen building work we've been doing lately. We need to speak about our expertise more regularly. We need to elevate ourselves and start using words that even parents don't understand. I had a conversation with a school recently where we did a bit of a revamp of their newsletter. And we talked about the first editorial that was going to be on the front. And I often say that Australians who are in the room today will be familiar with a journalist who I'm not a fan of called Andrew Bolt. And but one thing that Andrew Bolt does incredibly well is that he sends a message to his readers every single day. That whenever he writes something, he writes from an area, from a level of expertise. Brilliant at it. Look at every headline, look at every opening statement that Andrew Bolt writes, and it screams, "I know what I'm talking about," and all these people don't. And people trust that expertise. When you go to a doctor's surgery, we're talking about the newsletter. And in the newsletter, one of the assistant principals at the school said, "Well, we can't use the word pedagogy because parents won't know what we're talking about." And I said, "Of course we can." I said, "Well, I know what we mean." And I said, "Well, who would you go to if you wanted to know what the word pedagogy meant?" You'd come to us, you'd come to the experts. So we need to put ourselves out there as people who know stuff and use words that other people don't. It's all right. When you go to a doctor's surgery, when you go to a dentist, often we don't know what they're talking about. And we actually have to stop and say, "Sorry, can you explain that again? Can you explain it to me like I'm 5 years old? So I actually get what we're talking about here." Doctor's surgeries are really interesting. When you go to a doctor's surgery, they've actually got a room where they make you wait. Who's noticed that you wait even if you're the first appointment of the day? Yeah, funny that, because there's a message here that says, just come in and sit down there for a minute. Have a good think for a moment about how smart the person is that you're going in to see. So smart that you have to wait to see them. That's how clever they are. And who's noticed that when you go into a doctor, you come out of the waiting room, only organisation in the world, the waiting room, and then you go out of there and you go into the doctor's suite, there's often another wait, about 3 or 4 minutes, where you sit on a chair that has its back to a wall, and the opposite wall to you are all of the doctor's qualifications. Anyone notice that? Yeah. I want you to have another moment. This is thoroughly by design. I want you to have another moment where you go, "Man, the person I'm about to see really knows their stuff. Look at all those certificates up there. All right, I better listen because I don't want to waste their time." Everything that happens from the moment that you walk into a doctor's surgery elevates the expertise of the person that you're going to spend a little bit of time with. They don't have time for arguments. They don't have time for people who are blowing sales back into them by saying, "No, I don't have a throat infection. I don't think so." They don't have time for that. What they want to do is to be able to do their job and get on with it and to demonstrate their expertise and to help. And they want you to do your bit. They want you to stand at the back of the boat by agreeing, nodding your head, and then walking out and going to the pharmacy and getting the prescribed antibiotics. So what we need to do, this is lesson number one, the lesson that comes with this little history, examination of what's gone wrong here. Lesson number one is that all of our communications need to start to be a little more Andrew Boltish and much more about our expertise around teaching and learning and citizen building. One more tale before we move forward. The school that I mentioned that was revamping their newsletter, they couldn't work out what's going on. We had worked together for 3 years implementing restorative practices and had changed so much. The student learning outcomes of the school were wonderful. The staff retention at the school, great teachers were staying at this school. High quality teachers were clambering to get into this school. The kids, the reports that we were getting, the data that we were getting, and survey tools that we were using to measure social outcomes and school climate in the school were so positive. We had every key indicator had gone up and up significantly in this school, except parent perception data. And we sat in a leadership meeting and went, how could this be? How could we have changed so much in the school that's been positive, and still have had our parents basically not notice? What are we going to do about that? And it's a communications imperative. The problem we had was they didn't know. We'd still been talking about some of the organisational stuff. We talked about what's one of our key levers for communicating. And they said, well, it's our newsletter. We actually have quite good uptake on that. So we did, as I mentioned before, revamp the newsletter. But no more would we have at the top of a newsletter those 2 words that are most commonly at the top of Australian newsletters: principals report. Not being a principal, written reports. I don't know about you, but have you ever picked up a school newsletter and seen the headline at the top, principals report, and thought, I'd really like to read on now? No, you don't. So we changed it. We said we're going to write headlines like we're Andrew Bolt. And the headline that we wrote above in their school was ex-primary school. I won't use their names now just in case I don't have permission for this. Ex-primary school reduces bullying related reports by 45% in the last 12 months. Ask us how. Oh no, this is how. And then the principal's report was all about the wonderful work that we've done to reduce bullying in the school. Fabulous. Fabulous. And we spent we made a really cool newsletter, new graphically designed look out of it as well. It started to get posted online. And what do you know, 12 months later, the parent perception data was through the roof. The truth is, across that 12-month period, we'd implemented nothing new. We just consolidated what we had been doing previously. But what we spoke about was different. What we talked to people about was now our immense expertise. And all of a sudden what we found was that the teachers and the school leaders in the school were being held in a much higher regard. This is how important the communication piece is. So what I want to do today is bring to you a methodology that you can use. Just trying to see if I can get it to go to the next screen for me. There it is. To recover from the damage that has been caused by the media to the relationship between home and school. And so what I believe is it's a little bit like trying to start a fire. Okay, you need 3 elements, and if you don't have all 3 elements, and people who are science teachers by trade in the video tutorial this afternoon will be aware that for you to have fire, you need 3 elements, and they are fuel, heat, and oxygen. Okay, if you've got those 3 in place, you can get fire, but with only 2, with 2 out of the 3, it might not be bad, but it's not going to start a fire. And so what we want to do is I've replaced those 3 words with the 3 elements that I think we need in order to be able to initiate, to spark and to ignite parent engagement with our work around teaching and learning and our work around citizen building. And they are message, volume, and channel. And so what I mean by message is exactly what I just unpacked, so I won't dwell on that any longer. The message part is just a reminder to us, don't be boring. Speak about the things that parents want to hear from you, and that is around teaching and learning. What are the programs? How do teachers teach in the school? What are they achieving? If your NAPLAN results go up in a certain year level, you've got to spruik that. You've got to tell people this happened because we did this. You want to know more about it? Come and talk to the expert. So when it comes to your messaging, it must be around teaching and learning, and it must be around the citizen building stuff that you're doing. It must not be organisational stuff and nags. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So it's not just using the tools that you've got to be able to get messages out there that just make your life a little bit easier. That isn't communication. Think about communication if you were in your home, perhaps if you've got a partner or family members that you live with. Okay, think about what the communication would be like if all you did was send messages about what you want people to do. Don't forget to bring your $1.50 on Friday because we're raising money for X Foundation and want you to buy a sausage. If all it was just this one-way, naggy type communication, think about the response that you would eventually get from the people that you're supposed to love. So message is about staying on brand around those two key areas because they're your two areas of expertise. Every time we communicate, we have an opportunity to elevate ourselves as experts, and we should not miss one opportunity to do that. The next sphere here is around the channel. Okay, so that's the heat of our parent message. So channel is about understanding that we have more platforms that we can share message on now than we ever have before. In the old days, there were pretty much only two. There was a newsletter and there was an assembly. And if you got up and spoke about those important things at either of those, you probably got most of the stakeholders to hear something. Families have changed enormously over the last few years. And what we need to do is to change with them. And we need to understand where people are getting their communication these days. And it isn't always at assembly and it isn't always newsletters. In fact, the read rate on newsletters, even if you send them home electronically, the read rates, the studies that have been done on how many parents read the newsletter, runs at about 7.8%. Okay, it's not high. But comparative to the other channels you use, it actually is pretty good. So you should still continue to use a newsletter. You should just pump it out in a variety of different ways. Use different channels. Use your social media. If your school hasn't got a Facebook account, get one. Facebook's penetration into various groups in the community is a fascinating thing to study. Apparently, the mental health workers apparently is where Facebook is their #1 cohort. I don't know what that's about. But cohort #2 is the parents of primary school age children, particularly the female parent, the mum. Okay, and behind them is often secondary age as well. So we have to be clear about the fact that if we are not part of that conversation and speaking to that conversation on social media, then they will create that opportunity anyway because they're already there. And this is where schools that don't have a Facebook page where they celebrate the fantastic things they do around teaching and learning and citizen building, where they celebrate that, where they don't have it, parents set their own group up. And it becomes sort of an online version of the car park mafia. And we have to somehow manage and moderate and try to influence that. And we're begging for them to not say negative things about us online, but that's not their page's rules. The great part about setting your own page up is that you can set the rules for that. So you get to determine exactly what the rules of engagement are on your page, and you get to determine the way that the communication heads outwardly. If I was to recommend one school to you, that when you finish up today, or perhaps you're going to be one of those people that cheat and, you know, while you're online already today, you might already be have another browser open or however it is that you're managing to make this work for you today. Check out Kananook Primary School, K-A-N-A-N-O-O-K. Check out their Facebook page. I think that's probably the most artful demonstration of teaching and learning and citizen building, and the way that they positively message by celebrating their achievements in that space has been a significant factor in the way that they've been able to move parents from the front of the boat to the back of the boat to be able to stay with them. It's a fabulous example. Now, channel is also about saying, can we be mindful that sometimes it's really cool to be able to build once and deliver often? So my advice to you would be, if you're going to present at an assembly, another great tool to be able to speak, and there's actually some research around assemblies that they rate really highly in terms of schools that are countering bullying effectively. I know, work that out, eh? I had to dig into this. What's that all about? How come assemblies are important in schools that counter bullying effectively? And what it is that assemblies are when a school leader gets up in front of all three stakeholder groups at once: students, your staff, and we often open the doors to parents. And we talk about what's important. And when we get up there and we say what's important, and we talk about Susan building, teaching and learning, and achievements in that space, and ambitions in that space, and the things we need for people to help us get to the, get faster, make the boat go faster, then that becomes an incredibly important thing. So using that's really important. But you know what? Not everyone can make it to your assembly, can they? So please just get someone there with a phone to either go Facebook Live with it and run your assembly at the key times that parents are on Facebook, which is proven to be about 9:30 in the morning. Funny that, just after they've dropped the kids at school. Run your assembly then, go Facebook Live, and they'll catch it. They'll catch those key messages. And you've done it once for two audiences, the people that are there at the assembly and the people that are on their phones in their cars or sitting at home. Okay, record it, but put it up at a different time. And so using all of your different channels that you've got and using creative ways to use those channels is a great way to get messaging through. Even on your social media platforms, whether it's you're going to be using Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, whatever it is that you're going to use, using pictures and video multiplies the engagement of the people enormously. So don't rewrite, don't put a picture version of a PDF of your front page of your newsletter when they can't actually even read it if they put it up, bring it up on their phone. But just speak to the key message down the camera like I'm doing now. You'll be on a laptop today where you've got a webcam that you can record. Speak to that key message for 1 minute and pump it out there, but you can get it out there on all three of those platforms. So there's a build one. It feels sometimes like the job of using all of these channels requires an enormous amount of work, and it doesn't. Getting access to those channels can be a lot simpler than you think by building once and delivering often. A lot of people ask us at Real Schools, they say, you're pretty prolific on the socials. How do you remember to go and put those messages out there every single day that remind people about what you can do, and articles from around the world and responses to key messages? We don't do it every 3 hours. We use a social media scheduler called Buffer, and it puts all of our posts in there, and it gives you the opportunity to add to the queue, and it gives you the opportunity to share something next. Easy. Hack the system to make sure that your messages are put out there more regularly on all of the different platforms that you've got available, but build once, deliver often. And the fuel for your ignition of parent engagement is volume, which means that you have to speak to this stuff regularly. We make the mistake sometimes of thinking that we did the bullying talk at assembly and that means it's done and everyone got that message. No, we make the mistake of thinking, well, I did write a newsletter about teaching and learning once, and that's not enough. The volume has to be regular. The volume has to go out. And like I said, the best way to achieve that volume is build once, deliver often. Go back to a key message that you delivered ages ago and put that one up again. This is a reminder of something that went out last year. It's just as important now as it's ever been. So hitting people with those really key messages as often as you possibly can is important. And you can see in the model here, there's a couple of three little arrows that point to the overlaps between two different spots in the model. Normally that would produce a positive result because all three of these things, message, channel and volume, are positive things, the things you can do, and they're great. Normally we'd get a positive result. Unfortunately, when we apply the context of parent engagement, we get a negative because there's something missing. So if we look at the overlap, for instance, between message and channel, so we've got our message right, we're pumping it, we put the message out there using the multiple channels, and we're quite creative and using video and using pictures, but we're not doing it enough. We're unconvincing. If we don't say it all the time, we don't believe what they're talking about. This is the psychology that's used by politicians at campaign times. And you can hear them come up with these banal 3-word slogans that kind of drive us crazy after a while. But they use it because they want us to be convinced that they are convinced. They say it over and over and over again in the hope that we'll go, well, he seems to really believe that. What's fascinating, I think, about the last federal election is they both basically had the same 3-word slogan around fair go kind of stuff, without any of us really noticing that there was no distinction between the things that they were trying to say. When it comes to the overlap between volume and channel, so what we find there is we're saying lots of stuff. We're using all of the platforms that are available to us, but the message is wrong. We're giving them operationals. We're nagging them. We're, giving them lists at the front of our newsletter of kids that were awarded Student of the Week last week. We're untrustworthy. We don't sound like we mean it. We don't sound like we're experts. And can I say that whole thing about trust, we spoke about that right at the start of the video tutorial today, about building trust is about building your level of expertise. And if we're not prepared to speak to our expertise with outrageous regularity, if we're not prepared to speak those two key things that they send their kids to school for, if we won't speak to that, they won't trust us. They won't trust that they can step onto that platform with us. And if we're big on the message, we've got that right, and we talk about it a lot, but we don't put the message where they are, we don't use the multitude of channels we've got, we're just frankly a bit boring. Yeah, that's on the newsletter, but I don't really look at that. So, it comes home at the bottom under a smashed banana, or it comes as an email, and I usually open it. We've got to get to where they are, and that means you get over some of your phobias, perhaps, about things like video. There's a whole section on, for instance, on Facebook now. You'll notice that if you're a Facebook user, that there's your news feed, which is the button on the bottom left, and right next to it is a video one. So they know that people on Facebook don't even just consume video from their feed, they consume it by going to a whole bunch of videos that someone else has posted, and I don't even know what they're about, but I'll click it and find out. That's how interesting we find video. Part of my determination to try and maximise your engagement today is to be on your screen. We have this flash tool called Ecamm Live that we clearly haven't worked out completely yet, because you can still see all the buttons, right? And so we're working it out, but we want to maximise your engagement by allowing you to be able to have a video that isn't just a blank PowerPoint slide. You can see me talking to that slide. I'm going to do it wrong. It's over there. There it is. It's over there. So I'm learning how to do it because I know that engages people. So be aware that all of these three things are important, but it's the bit in the middle that really matters. It's a combination of these three when you get the real magic start to happen. And if you can use that to try and build your approach to working with parents, I really reckon you can pull them to the back of the boat. I really do. They want this. They want to be involved in the school community that they feel like they can support. It's just that all the messages that come into their lounge rooms at 6:30 every night are saying, don't touch it, don't trust the school. If we can counter those messages by tapping into their moral purpose for putting their kids in your company for 6 or 7 hours every day, if we can tap into that and have them receive more messages than Tracy sends out about the really important stuff, they'll come. They'll come to the back of the boat, even around some of the things that you want to change. And you need their trust for, because it's unfamiliar. It's not what they went to school with. If you want to do that work, you can get them there, but just amazingly important that you're really conscious about your communications plan. And I hope you get that. The path to recovery is a communications imperative. So I'm not here, and I think Kevin's statement before that that if we wouldn't be enough space in the news to print our good stuff is just so pertinent here. The stuff you're doing is good. The job we've got here is about making sure that they know it and that they don't get their advice on whether it's good or not from Ms. Grimshaw. I hope that's clear. All right, so I promised you 2 outrageously practical things. I just want to pause for a moment because I've noticed a couple of things in the chat box. I've got that awkward thing of working at the platform today. So I know that I've got the chat on the, sort of partly on the screen, so I don't want to reveal that. I just want to go through a couple of comments. Rachel, when it comes to parent-teacher relationships, it's not that parents don't respect the teacher expertise, it's they are seeking ways to support their children, that's right, and want to be listened to when it comes to how well they know their children. Parents often feel disempowered due to their lack of being enabled to be part of their children's education. They don't know what we're up to. This has clearly come through in the research I've just done with parents and how appreciative they are now that they know what their children are learning and how they can have a decent conversation about the learning with their children. Absolutely true. We've got a situation here where parents have had a peek behind the curtain, haven't they? And I've had a little look at what it's all about. And for many teachers that I'm speaking to lately, it's all of a sudden a renewed appreciation. And Angela's doing like the whole, oh, wow, I do nag in the newsletter. Fabulous. All right. I'm going to give you my 2 big tips for bringing parents on side. because now we've got a bit of a model for working. I want to do a bit of a so what now what with you. All right, one thing that I want you to do and one thing that I don't want you to do. The thing that I do want you to do to maintain trust in a relationship with a parent is this. Every time you call a parent to report their child's poor behaviour, ask an open and kind, honest and kind question first. So I have a rule for myself, which is that if I needed to ring a parent when I was in that big chair, because a child had done something wrong and I thought the right thing to do was to let that parent know that this happened, that I refused to tell them in the first few sentences of the phone call because they're defensive. I want you to think about this for a minute. What do you feel? What would you feel if you were a parent and the school rang and said, your kid's done the wrong thing at lunchtime today? I know that for me, it's almost a physiological reaction. I almost feel a heat come over me. I know this because it happened. And I know this because I had a compulsion in that moment to blame the school for it. Something had happened with my son in a PE class, and I knew that the PE teacher was a very interesting character, and I thought it must be her. She's just completely nuts. And I felt myself, thinking these things that I was about to say, speaking to another principal, who I thought was cruel. I thought she'd, rung me for principal stuff, but she'd ambushed me with something else. And what I felt, what was the emotion that I felt at that time when she told me that my son had done something aggressive in a PE class? I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. And in that state, I was prepared to say some really strange stuff. And I didn't mean it. I really didn't. It was just my perhaps emotional immaturity. It was perhaps me just being caught on the spot. And it was perhaps, I think, only the fact that I've been working on this stuff for 25 years that allowed me to go, oh my goodness, you're about to do this. It was only that. There was a protective factor between me and actually unloading on this poor PE teacher in her absence. How unprofessional would that have been? Yet the shame almost induced me to do it. And so I reflected hard on that and came up with this rule for myself that I will hold, and I write about this in Restoring Teaching, that I will hold it not against any stakeholder in my school, a parent, a staff member, or a child, a student, who says something in shame that seems cruel and nasty. I won't hold it against them. It's just their shame talking for them. And so what I want to do is to give them an opportunity to step at least slightly out of that shame moment. And so parents will ring up, and there's often the parent who's got you in speed dial, and they go, what's he done now? I'm going to tell you in a minute, I promise you. But what I want to know first is, are you noticing anything different? Is there anything going on that I'm not aware of? Because I think that what I shouldn't do is ring you up and kind of embarrass you about something that happened at recess without showing you the respect to say, you know what, is there something happening that I'm not aware of? Are you seeing anything different at home? Tell me the story. And by people having the opportunity to tell you what's going on for them, and sometimes it is no, I just, so right. So, and I'm able to go, right, so it's just something that's happening at school. Okay, you're not seeing anything, but often I'll find out that there is something going on. And that's such valuable information for me. It's so nice to be able to pull some of the missing jigsaw pieces into place, and to be able to then build a plan that helps this young person to be able to move forward. I don't get that really important information if I just hit them with what their kid's done wrong at recess, because all I get is a shame response. And that emotional interaction at that point, particularly if I'm silly enough as a school leader to try and defend it or to argue it, all I find is it just gets worse and worse. So take that tactic, please. Steal it. All right. Don't put your parents in a shame position. For the parents who often get a phone call from the school to say that their child has done the wrong thing, they're in shame the moment they see that number on their phone. So what I need to do is to speak to the neocortex of their brain, not the limbic system of their brain. I want to speak to their thinking brain, not their feeling brain. And the best way to do that is to ask for their side of the story. So that's something I want you to do. Now, something that I don't want you to do, Ange, I'm hoping that you're paying very close attention here, okay? Don't use technology to nag. Because what it does is it lets your school community know that you've forgotten the meaning of communication. As I mentioned earlier in the video tutorial today, great communication is not in your home, is not just walking around barking banal instructions at people. Okay, and even the doctor's surgery know this. They've got some setup in place that's all around elevating the doctor's level of expertise for you. But what they don't do is nag you with the banal, boring stuff. As you walk in, they don't say, "Oh, would you mind sitting over there because we're trying to clean these 3 seats?" And by the way, read the New Idea, but not the other magazines, please, because I don't think that you're going to get much out. I don't think you're probably ready for the National Geographic stuff. It's a bit highbrow. Could you do that? And if you're going to get a drink, by the way, would you please do us the service of putting the thing in the bin before you actually leave the waiting room? They don't bother you with those little boring operational stuff, because then I'll get the message. This is what they're on about. This is what they do. Don't send messages on the front of your newsletter about why hot dogs have gone up by 40 cents. Don't send messages on the front of the newsletter that are just a regurgitation of Mrs. Jones took these group of students on an excursion last week. You're not writing a report for these people. You're trying to inform them about how amazing the work is that you do around teaching and learning and citizen building. Speak to that loud. Speak to that often through the devices and the channels that you have available to them. Let them find out the other pieces another way. I'm frustrated that schools aren't being given great advice about how to communicate better on this. Even for myself, I know that my kids in school, set up an app for us to be able to communicate apparently more effectively through the app. What they mean is that they've just found a new toy through which to nag us. And I don't engage with that level of communication very well. It doesn't do it for me. I'm not mad at them. I'm not, I'm not cracking it. I'm not going down to the school and thumping desks because they put an app together. But I am disarming the notifications on it. Okay. So speak loud, speak often to the things that you're experts in, and I think that you can pull those people to the back of the boat with you pretty easily. Here's the good part. When you use your key platforms that you've got to communicate, and you do it about things that you are close to your purpose. So this is the good part, is that for us as school leaders, this stuff around teaching and learning, and this stuff around building great citizens, it's what we want to do as well. It's our purpose too. And when we communicate about our passion for that, when we communicate positively, when we communicate progress, achievement, success around that, it's much more fun to write the front page of a newsletter. It's much more fun. So step into that joyfully, lose the old habits of communicating around operationals, and I think that you're going to find a brave new future for your school. So before you go, wrote a book on this. This is one tiny sliver of how to get parents on side around, particularly if one of the changes that you're looking to build is how do we create a restorative school. Restoring Teaching's got 2 key messages here. One is what we've been speaking about today, which is how do you elevate the expertise and the perceived expertise of your teachers in your community. And then the second part is how you can do it through practicing restoratively. So there's this straddling of those 2 key concepts all the way through the book. I think in the chat box, Simon was going to put a link for you to be able to go and grab that if you want. And I'm nervous about, what you're sort of seeing on my screen, and because I'm still learning this platform. We'll get there. I think Simon's going to put a link in there. If not, just head to the Real Schools website. You'll see the books tab, and down beneath it, you'll be able to get there. You'll be able to get to that. Grab a copy. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about, this focus on why we should focus on parental communication and 21st century parent communication. I do it for a reason, and it's because it's a response to a synthesis of research that we've done around teacher wellbeing. And this is, I had a meeting this afternoon with a mentoring program we run called the Inner Circle for schools who are for school leaders who are implementing restorative practices, and talking about the exhaustion levels of their staff at the moment. Workload, student behaviour, and the third factor in this is undoubtedly issues with the parents. They contribute enormously to negative impacts on teacher wellbeing. Amy Green has done a power of creative and analytic work in this space. And she's developed what we're calling teacher wellbeing partnerships. And what it means is you'd be fully resourced as a school across an entire 12-month period. And we're not talking 40 weeks here, we're talking 52. Videos, podcasts, ebooks, communities where people are able to talk online about what's really going on for them. And you can sign your school up for $1,950. I think you would be nuts to not take hold of this opportunity. One of the things that Amy's pointed out is that one of the challenges we have in our schools is that somebody carries the wellbeing bag. Someone's responsible for it, which means they have to like take on that boulder and sort of drag it with a chain up a hill, with everybody else just sitting on the boulder going, well, someone else is responsible for that, for wellbeing, because it's on their badge. I'll just sit back and wait for wellbeing. Amy says, what happens if everybody's responsible for wellbeing? What are the activities around self-care that would take well-being of your staff away from being one person's bag to carry and made it something that we all collectively contribute to? What's possible there? And I reckon that can be a major thing for your school. I think that if you have a look in the chat box, I think Simon's going to put a link where you would be able to sign yourselves up for that. I've got a funny feeling Kevin's been reading some of my work there around restoring teaching, because he's referring to chapter 1 there, which is a chapter that's called "This Shit Has to Stop." There's some stuff that does have to stop in our schools. We haven't done audio yet, Shelley. We're working on that. We're looking at an audio version as we go. We're still sort of in the launch phase at the moment, so that's coming along. And hey, just saying, well, I think I might have missed a slide there. Did I? Next webinar, I thought I had in there. There we go. Next webinar is for you. Going well there, aren't I? Next webinar is for your teachers, and it's around contemporary differentiation. A bit like restorative practices. There's some myths around differentiation, and one is that it adds an enormous amount to teacher workload. We can mitigate that, and we can actually get to a point where any additional workload around differentiating effectively becomes something that that is outweighed by the gains and by the improvements in stress level for teachers. So this one, today's webinar, very much targeting school leaders and wanting to help you guys out with that today. But if you have teachers in your school that you're trying to convince that differentiation is a tool that they should have in their hip pocket, then please send them along to this one. You're going to get a link to be able to register for that, and in the follow-up email from this webinar, and I hope you get them all along. All right, stay in touch, hey? Fabulous to have you all here today. Thank you for putting up with our little technical challenges. I don't even know now if you can see as I'm sort of flicking through the guest list. I'm just trying to get my last handle on who's here today and whether you've had anything that you wanted to chat about. I'm just sort of doing another flick through the chat box to see if there's any other questions that have bobbed up in there that I need to respond to. I'll leave it there, but what I will do is what I'll do at the end of all these sessions is I'm just going to sit around. I've got the attendee list on my screen. I'm going to let the number go down a bit. If you've got any other questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm going to keep an eye on that, and give you a few minutes to sort of slowly exit the room at your own pace. All right, thank you so much for coming along. Stay in touch. Give us a hoy if we can help you. No worries.